Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving deep into one of the most famous and most shocking psychological experiments ever conducted. It's a story that reveals the darker side of human nature, questioning how far we might go in the name of authority. This is the story of the Milgram Experiment. It all began in 1961 at Yale University under the guidance of psychologist Stanley Milgram. But what was this experiment really about? Let's take a closer look at the shocking results that changed the way we think about obedience. In the early 1960s, Milgram, a professor of psychology, wanted to explore a question that many psychologists had been grappling with. Why do people follow orders, even when those orders are morally wrong? The context of this question was rooted in the aftermath of World War II, when many of the Nazis who carried out horrific crimes argued that they were just following orders. Milgram wanted to know, could ordinary people in the right circumstances be compelled to commit evil acts if they were told to do so by an authority figure? Milgram recruited participants for the experiment by placing an ad in the local newspaper. The volunteers were told the study was about memory and learning, and their role was to help test a new method of teaching. But here's the catch. The real purpose of the experiment was something entirely different. The participant, who would be the teacher, was told that they would administer electric shocks to the learner every time the learner answered a question incorrectly. The learner was sitting in another room, out of sight, and was not actually being shocked. Instead, a hidden recording would make it sound as though the learner was in agony. The teacher began with a mild shock. As the learner gave more incorrect answers, the voltage was increased, going up to 450 volts, labeled as danger, severe shock. But here's where it gets disturbing. The learner began to scream in pain, beg for mercy, and eventually go silent. The teacher could hear all this, yet the experimenter, the authority figure in the white lab coat, simply instructed the teacher to continue, saying, "Please continue," or "The experiment requires that you continue." Now you might expect that any normal person, when faced with someone crying out in pain, would stop. But in Milgram's study, a shocking 65% of participants administered the highest level of shock, all the way up to 450 volts, despite hearing the learner's agonizing screams. The results of this experiment were unprecedented and terrifying. It showed that the majority of people, ordinary, well-meaning individuals, were willing to cause harm to another person if an authority figure told them to. It demonstrated just how powerful obedience can be. While Milgram's experiment was groundbreaking, it wasn't without its controversies. Many have questioned the ethics of putting participants through such emotional distress, especially when they were unaware of the true nature of the experiment. Participants were deceived. They thought they were hurting someone, even though no one was actually harmed. After the experiment, many volunteers reported feeling deeply distressed by what they had done. Psychologists today are required to adhere to strict ethical guidelines, which would not allow such an experiment to be conducted in the same way. The emotional impact on participants, the lack of informed consent, and the psychological distress involved all raise significant concerns. The Milgram experiment left a lasting impact on psychology and on our understanding of human behavior. It didn't just show us how obedience works, it forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Milgram's study reminds us that in times of crisis or under powerful leaders, people can easily be persuaded to do things they wouldn't normally do. From military personnel following orders to corporate leaders issuing commands that harm others, the Milgram experiment highlights the danger of blind obedience. But the question remains, what would you do in a similar situation? How far would you go to obey an authority figure, even when it means going against your own morals? The Milgram experiment didn't just reveal the dark side of human nature, it showed us that we must remain vigilant against the power of authority. We often think of ourselves as morally upright, of having the courage to stand up for what is right. But Milgram's experiment asks us to reflect on just how strong the influence of authority can be. If the situation calls for it, how far could we really go? Thank you for joining us today on this deep dive into one of psychology's most disturbing experiments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating insights into the human mind. This has been a journey into the power of authority